As John said, we've had a bit of a change of plans. I was meant to be sharing the stage here with my co-editors of this book, Steve Chambers and Ashley Brown, but unfortunately, neither of them have been able to join us at the last minute. They've had to pull out. So what I'll be doing is discussing our book that we edited inside GHQ, The Gallipoli Diary of Captain Orlo Williams. What I'll really do, I'm going to try and make sure we've got time for Q&A. So maybe in the next half hour or so, I'll tell you a little bit about the book and our approach to editing it. Obviously, a little bit about Orlo Williams, who you can see there in the picture, and give you a bit of an insight into how valuable this diary is to our understanding of how GHQ at Gallipoli functioned, and the sort of how and why of the way the Gallipoli campaign unfolded the way it did from a sort of planning perspective and staff work. Hopefully my slides have just changed, but I wanted to start by saying, explaining a bit about why this book exists. Orlo Williams is often quoted in Gallipoli books. When I was doing my PhD, I read all the literature I could on Gallipoli, and his name would pop up every now and then, and you might see in an index to any book 2 or 3 references to him. But his handwriting, which you can see on that slide there, means people never really examined it at length. It's really difficult to read. At that time, it was at the Imperial War Museum, or it still is at the Imperial War Museum. And so there's sort of some challenges to research. So other historians hadn't used it to a large extent. In 2008, I was at the Imperial War Museum doing my PhD research, and I, like other historians, read it. And then I kept reading it and I couldn't put it down. And quite frankly, it was the best diary I'd ever read. And that led to me the next year through the Imperial War Museum writing to Orlo's family, requesting permission to publish it. And his granddaughter, who controls access to his papers, granted that permission. So that's 2009, obviously a long time ago. And it's taken a long time. The book has been released this year. Why has it taken so long? Well, partly it's because of how difficult it is to decipher the cipher's pen. You can see really how challenging that is. His Gallipoli diary is actually 2 volumes. The handwriting is tiny. It's roughly 80,000 words that we had to type up from that handwriting. A lot of it was really difficult to understand, so a lot of research is to understand the words and the people. And the project started with just me. I was doing it, for my own research, and it always played second fiddle to other projects, those ones that, as a historian, pay the bills. So it always kept slipping and slipping. I got married, got a PhD, had some kids, had some other jobs, and Orlo was always in the background. And I was frustrated that it wasn't sort of progressing much. So eventually I realized I'd never finish it by myself. And I approached Steve and Ash, and both agreed, thankfully, to come on board. And together we got it over the line, and a great amount of work between the 3 of us to see this really handsome book. We're also very lucky that we had a fantastic publisher, Little Gully Publishing. They approached us, really keen to publish the diary, and then they've done some great Gallipoli books already, but truly an amazing publisher. And they turned, our work and turned it into this beautiful book full of pictures, and we pushed on towards the end. We also learned that towards the end, an American researcher had tried to do something similar to us in the past. He had traveled to the UK, seen the value in this diary, but you weren't allowed to photocopy it. So he read the whole thing into a dictaphone, went back to America, typed it up, and tried to get it published and never did. So we managed towards the end to get a photocopy of his manuscript, and comparing it with Orlo's text and with what we had uncovered, there were really a lot of differences. We found that because he wasn't able to go back and check his earlier work, there were just lots of errors. And so we in editing Orlo's diary, really keen to not make those same mistakes. Obviously, we had the diary that we could double check, whereas the American researcher had not been able to do that. But it was important for us to be for the diary and what that we published to be as accurate as possible to what Orlo had written. So we took a very light editorial touch. We expand some names, and where things weren't clear, we explain how we deal with that in the book. But we were honest when we used our editorial pen, but we rarely used it. What we did do was provide chapter introductions. So we split the diary into 10 chapters, each sort of roughly corresponding with a month. And then we provided an introduction so that the reader can understand the key aspects of the campaign at that stage, and also set the context for what you're about to read, which is Orlo's diary. We also did biographical research on the nearly 300 people mentioned in the diary. So at the back of our book, there's the full names of those people, as well as the rank and the positions they held at the time they were first mentioned in the diary. And that was a huge amount of work, but very valuable, I think, to us as researchers, and also to those who are reading the book and giving us great reviews already. And another great thing we were able to put in the book are about 50 photos that Orlo himself took while at Gallipoli, so some at headquarters, some on his visits to the peninsula, and most of which have not been published before. So it's a fantastic resource. There, strangely, or perhaps not strangely, there's not many photos of Orlo himself. He wasn't sort of there taking selfies as we know it today, but what we do get are photos of many of the characters that he served at General Headquarters with. So what we get in this diary, and we'll go into this in a bit more detail soon, is this really unique insight. We only have really 4 accounts of life at General Headquarters. One of those are the 2 volumes of General Sir Ian Hamilton's own Gallipoli diary. We have a volume by Compton Mackenzie, the novelist who actually dedicated his book, Gallipoli Memories, to Orlo Williams. They were good friends. And more recently, we have Dr. Amy Fox's edited papers of Guy Dornay, who was another staff officer at General Headquarters and a good friend of Orlo's as well. But Orlo's is quite different from all of those. So neither Hamilton's or Mackenzie's were actually diaries, and there's material in there that is clearly a reflection. And Dornay's papers are more based on letters and correspondence than a day-by-day diary account, whereas Orlo's is a day-by-day diary of the campaign. So who was Orlo Williams? Well, Orlando Cyprian Williams, the son of Cyprian Williams, or Cip, and Helen Rosalind Campbell, who you can see there in the picture. He was born in Paddington in 1883, and he comes from a family with a very successful legal heritage. So his father was a barrister. His uncle was on the Privy Council as a lawyer. His grandfather was a barrister, and quite a wealthy family. His mother was a philanthropist and artist, and you can see here a painting by one of those artists who benefited from her business. There's a painting there of all those 2 younger sisters with his mother. Very well educated, sort of intellectual, upper class, educated at Ashdown House, then to Eton, and then on to, you can see him there, a picture of him as a young boy, and then on to Oxford University. Is fluent in 5 languages. He studied humanities with honours. He excelled at his education. He excelled at sports, and he is just really this remarkable character. When he finished his university studies, he went to the House of Commons as a clerk in 1907. In 1912, he married a divorcee. And interestingly, in the 1911 census, Orlo had been staying at the house of Alice, who you can see there in the picture, and her former husband. So he was at that house with one of his best friends who went to Gallipoli and appears all throughout the diary, Bernard Wallace, who was in the Royal Naval Division. So they'd been staying at the house in 1911. A year later, Orlo marries Alice after she secured a divorce, and they have a daughter, their only child, in 1913. In 1914, he goes from the House of Commons to the War Office as a civilian, and he's doing lots of the sort of secret deciphering and sending telegrams and handling secret documents, which made him a ready pick for his role at Gallipoli, where he enlisted in March of 1915, was appointed a temporary rank of captain, and appointed the cipher officer for General Hamilton's general headquarters. You can see there in the bottom of the slide that after Gallipoli, he stayed in Egypt and Palestine as a staff officer. He then, in 1918, moved back to London, went back to the War Office, and he was there until after war's end, and then he went back to the House and served as a civil servant for the remainder of his career. Later in life, he earned a Doctor of Civil Law. He was the principal clerk and committee at the House, served in the Home Guard during the Second World War, and received a whole bunch of medals. You can see his medal group there, which sold a few years ago in a private collection. Military Cross for his staff work at Gallipoli, the standard 1914-15 Star British War Medal and Victory Medal with oak leaf, because he was mentioned in dispatches 4 times. The French Legion of Honor, Italian Silver Medal of Military Valor, and then later for his service in the House of Commons, he received the Silver Jubilee Medal of 1935, the Coronation Medal of 37, and in 1941 was invested as a Companion of the Order of Bath, and then he got a medal, the Defence Medal, for his Second World War service. Here is a print of him later in life, not that long before he died in 1967. He was sort of this literary genius, I'd say. He was publishing books before he went to Gallipoli. As a very young man, he ended up publishing 17 books. He wrote essays about Gallipoli. He was he reviewed all kinds of works. He was friends with, you can see, T.S. Eliot, Catherine Mansfield, and Compton Mackenzie, who we mentioned before. And he was remembered in his death for his intellect and his charm. And when you read this diary and you read his accounts, you can't help but be charmed and amazed by this man. So we see here the telegrams that are appointing him and telling him to present for duty. He joined Hamilton's staff as the cipher officer. He's one of those 14 officers that leaves London on the 13th of February, the 13th of March 1915, and sails, gets on a train and then sails through to Gallipoli. It's important, I think, to understand a little bit about the structure of GHQ. So GHQ being the headquarters that works to support General Hamilton and help coordinate what the various corps and divisions are doing, and as the communication point between London and then further down the chain of command. So Hamilton was the General Office commanding. His Chief of the General Staff, Braithwaite, ran the staff at GHQ. And within GHQ itself, you had the General Staff branch. So they had the intelligence and operations sections. So they would collect information on the enemy and their whereabouts and strengths and weaknesses, as well as plan and coordinate operations. So write those operations orders that we've heard and communicate with the corps and divisions. There was also a Adjutant General's branch, so looking after things like discipline, and a Quartermaster General's branch, looking after logistics and medical evacuation and the like. So Orlo worked inside General Headquarters in the General Staff branch. So all secret cipher messages that had to be deciphered, that came from London to the Dardanelles, or that went from the Dardanelles to other theatres or back to London, it all went through Orlo. His job was to decipher it and then cipher it again for onwards transmission. So he knew of incoming messages. He knew of them before the generals. So he would turn them from their random ciphered text into something that the generals could read. And then when the generals, so like Hamilton, made a decision and wanted to inform London, Orlo would then know before people in London. And that included before the king or before the prime minister or the cabinet or Kitchener or Churchill. And he records all of this every day in his diary, like a very naughty boy, jotting down things in his diary that were absolutely secret and shouldn't have been written in his diary. But he did, and we're very thankful for it. And we can now compare what he wrote in his diary with those original telegrams, which are at the National Archives at Kew. His first diary entry on the 13th of March, so this first day, I'll read you a little bit of it. It says, appointed as cipher officer on GHQ Mediterranean Force, only suggested to me Thursday 8 p.m, confirmed 1 p.m. next day with orders to be ready to leave England 5 p.m. Saturday 13 March. After getting some instructions and uniform grant at the War Office on Friday afternoon, I joined Alice, so his wife, at Harrods and got practically everything by closing time. Dined with her, poor brave dear, at the Carlton. The whole thing seemed a dream coming so suddenly when I had already settled to join the Royal Naval Division at Blandford. Harrods came up to scratch wonderfully, and all my kit was ready by 11:30 Saturday today. Off in cab at 4:15 to Charing Cross, where a small special awaited us behind our ordinary train. Winston Churchill and his wife to see us off, also Lord Middleton, whose son Broderick is on the staff. There are only 14 of us altogether, including Sir Ian Hamilton. A few acquaintances made in the saloon going to Dover. The CGS is General Braithwaite, whose son, a subaltern, is with him. Also Captain Aspinall, Major Fuller, Lieutenant Colonel Ward and Major Churchill came over that morning from France, looking a regular campaigner with the most vicious bludgeon in his hand and huge revolver sticking out of his holster. Arriving at Dover, we went straight on board the Scout Foresight, which soon weighed. The commander welcomed us most cheerily with a collation in his cabin. We were due to arrive Calais at 8 and leave at once, but were very tiresomely delayed outside the harbour for nearly 2 hours till the examination service let us in. Sea was glassy calm and very odd to be sailing with lights out under the white ensign. Here we are to have a record journey. So he arrived in the Dardanelles with the other staff just in time for the naval assaults, and we know that those failed. But he says on arriving on the 17th of March, nothing eventful till just after 3. After gradually approaching the Turkish coast, we rounded the southern corner of Tenedos, and then with extraordinary suddenness, instead of sailing on a lonely sea, we came into the world full of life.
Let's just use our car.
In the roadstead of Tenedos lay a whole fleet, 2 liners, hospital ships, French and English, then 2 battleships, and then our own fleet. He goes on to describe the shipping that he can see and what he can see through field glasses. He finishes, almost impossible to believe this is only Wednesday and I was in London on Saturday. It's really surreal for Orlo. He's experiencing, military life and thinking about what's to come. And what he gives us in his diary each day are insights into the meetings and the discussions, the decisions, but mostly what he gives us insights into other people. He gossips, he talks to them, and then he records what they tell him about each other, what they tell him about how the campaign is going to unfold, what they think of other people's capacity and intellect, and he's putting all of this in his diary. As I said, almost 80,000 or roughly 80,000 words that he writes throughout the campaign. We see that we know there's this great naval disaster on the 18th. 3 battleships sunk, 3 damaged, and he concludes in his diary, and this is one of the chapter titles, that the Navy can't do it alone. And this is based on the discussions that he's in. And as a result of those discussions, the Gallipoli campaign is born. It went from a naval-only attack through to a joint amphibious operation that results in the landings that we see in April. Obviously, there's a lot of work that has to go into making those landings occur, and much of that falls on the general staff, people like Orlo and his mates in general headquarters. It's nearly all done by the general staff because the adjutant general's branch and the quartermaster's general branch still aren't in theatre. They're still on their way out. They left London later than the others. And so a lot of the sort of logistical and medical planning is being done by the general staff officers who are really busy in their own right, trying to figure out where to land and what forces to use and what they would do once they landed. So it gives us this great insight into really the chaos of planning, and the sort of complexities that everyone's trying to deal with. And there's this huge delay. So 18th of March, sorry, I think I said February before, 18th of March through to the 25th of April. That's a really long time that the Turks were able to get their defenses ready. And he shows us throughout the diary people being frustrated at that delay. And we keep getting these glimpses behind the scenes into what else is happening. And here we see some of his, two of his wonderful photographs of people in the headquarters. On the top there on the left, smoking a cigarette, we see Braithwaite Jr. We see Captain Pollen and Major Jack Churchill, so Winston's brother. And then on the bottom right, we can see Captain Guy Dornay on the left with the pipe. Well, I think they've both got pipes. Lieutenant Colonel Aspinall, who later wrote the British official history. We have very few photos of Aspinall, but here we have him in the middle, and then Major Grant. He's talking all through his diary, talking about the planning they're doing in Egypt, life aboard ships, and really he keeps admitting, as hard as it is in these conditions, gee, this is nothing like what it's going to be like for the soldiers on the ground. There's this intrigue all through his diary about he engages with all this intelligence. Intelligence is happening. There's espionage all around. MI6 sets up, or what we now know as MI6 sets up an office. They're running covert agents. They're capturing officers. They're questioning them and interrogating them, getting every information they can to help inform the planning that's occurring. And what we see is GHQ keeps stepping from ship to shore and from hotel to hotel. And we can see here the Savoy, it was one of the locations. In some of the literature of Gallipoli, certainly Ian Hamilton's diaries, initially he complains about the lack of intelligence and the lack of material. And there's been some great work on this, most notably by Professor Peter Doyle, sort of debunking the idea that there were no maps and no intelligence. And what we have from Orlo is this discussion of what he's reading and what's on the walls. There are maps on the walls. There are maps on the floors spread out everywhere that they're using for planning. So he's confirming these things and showing us that actually there was a lot of information. But again, that surprise is frustrating everyone, and that delay is frustrating everyone because it's going to remove the element of surprise. Colonel Williams of the General Staff saying we've slogged away for 6 weeks, and that's work that should have been done in England. They're all getting frustrated that this work is happening too late, that it's then being rushed, but that decisions aren't being taken, and that the enemy is being given more time to regroup. Here we see one of all those photographs of HMS Arcadian. So this was headquarters for a while. He talks about working in the cramped conditions of this ship. He talks about the issuing of force orders, and gives us insights into those who had planned that and what was behind their rationale for making certain decisions. And then he gives us, although from afar, these summaries and these overviews of what's happening in an operational sense. Ships are moving, people are meeting, and he's observing it all as a participant, but also as an observer, curiously writing it down in his diary. I won't go through the campaign. I think most of you probably have a good idea of that, and it's much better to read the diary to get a sense of that. Here you see a photo of Hamilton and Doughty Wiley. Doughty Wiley would be killed at Cape Helles only a matter of days after this photograph was taken. But he's reflecting there's headquarters officers general headquarters officers that joined the assaulting forces at Cape Helles and at Anzac, and he's reflecting on the information that they're sending back. So the picture that they're getting of how the battles are unfolding is coming from his colleagues on the peninsula itself. Again, I'll just flick through these. This is the River Clyde, which we all are aware of. It's on the front cover of the Gallipoli Association's magazine. But here you've got this wonderful photo, which Orlo took, and I've not seen anything like it before. But you can see those sally ports cut into the side. 2 of them there. There were 8 of them cut. You can see them really clearly in this photograph, which is just wonderful. Here you can see. So this is Orlo taking a photo from aboard Queen Elizabeth, and you can see out in the distance, Settle Bar Fort is straight ahead. Behind that is the old castle where Doughty Wylie his grave is when you go to the peninsula today, and you can see the River Clyde off to the left of the picture. Much easier if you can zoom in, but it's beached there. So these are live photos where he's describing what he can see and what's happening. And here you have a sketch of his, which we reproduce in the publication, but which he had in his diary explaining the key features. So you get these wonderful sketches, and we can attach them to parts in his diary where he'll talk about, I did a sketch today, or I took a photograph of this today. So obviously the landings occur quickly. No one gets anywhere near their objectives, and they don't for the whole campaign. But we start to get these great quotes, sort of wonderful. These are the sort of quotes that would appear in odd historians' work. Not odd historians, the odd work. 28th of April 1915, he says, the enemy's advance stopped by ship's fire. We distinctly saw a shell burst and blow a body of Turks into the air. Extraordinary how callous one is to scenes like that seen at a distance. So he's watching this from offshore. The next day, the 29th of April, the firing of the Triumph set Mardos on fire, a great column of smoke rising from behind Achibaba. Heard later, first shell burst in hospital, and later a store was set on fire. So we're getting this really vivid descriptions of what he's hearing and what he's seeing. He went ashore with others of GHQ on the 30th of April, and these are some of his photos. You see him here at the Settle Bar Fort ruins. Another one here of horse lines and tents on W Beach, where in his diary he says, I spent the morning ashore seeing W and V beaches, visited 29th Headquarters 29th Division, which consisted of a few tiny tents, some dispatch boxes, and a little table at which Hunter Weston sat. And I'll show you a photo of that in a moment. But here's forts. If you've been to Gallipoli, you've been to these locations. These photos will look really familiar to you. Here, Braithwaite indeed, so two headquarters officers. Ashore, you can see the Turkish barbed wire behind them. Overlooking V Beach and the fort. Again, taken really early in the campaign on the 30th of April. See the horses and things ashore. You see tents already set up. Trenches here with a dead Turk in it, and the next we get photos of that little table and the chairs of meetings. So we've got Hunter Weston here meeting with Hamilton at the 29th Divisional Headquarters on the 30th of April. So again, wonderful photos to accompany his wonderful text. He talks about life on Queen Elizabeth, that wonderful warship, about how cramped it was and how noisy it was, and the inability to sleep while doing constant work of sending wires back to London or to headquarters ashore. It's just endless work. And he also at this stage started being the keeper of the GHQ war diary. So if you look at the National Archives in the UK, or there's copies of them at the Australian War Memorial here in Canberra, the war diaries for GHQ, that terrible handwriting is usually Orlo's, particularly early on in the campaign. More photos here aboard ship, so we can see General Hamilton in the middle, Vice Admiral de Robeck on the left there. And so and accompanying this is discussions of the details of the conversations they're having and the decisions they're making. It's another wonderful photograph here. And we start to see some of these themes unfold in the diary of this uncertainty in London. So objectives haven't been met on the peninsula. Questions about whether failure should be reinforced at Gallipoli. And you get to see all of that through Orlo's eyes, because he's transcribing and he's writing those cables and sending them off and then writing them in his diary. And you can see this sort of despondency coming from London, from the Secretary of State for War, Lord Kitchener. You can see these responses by Hamilton, and then you start to see these real significant disputes internally between people about what the next steps should be, where they should prioritise their attention, what sort of tactics they should use, and then each time these attacks fail or fail to achieve their objectives, he's jotting down their views. He did manage to get to Anzac a month after the initial landings, on the 25th of May, writing about the previous day's visit to Anzac, where he'd been for the armistice to bury the dead from the 19 May Turkish attack. He says, "In front of our firing line is a plateau gradually rising, and the Turkish firing line is from 30 yards to 20 feet away from ours. Our trenches are deep, and communication trenches and footpaths run right down the steep slope, which, like all the rest, is covered with arbutus bushes and a kind of wild rose, and pitted with little dugouts, some only just large enough for a man to crawl into." We also see this big shift in May that affects how General Headquarters does its business, and that is the arrival off the coast of German submarines, and they start to wreak havoc on Allied shipping. And by sinking these ships, the decision is taken that General Headquarters will no longer sit aboard a ship, but it will go onto land, the safety of land, so that it can't be sunk. On the 31st of May 1915, GHQ shifts from the Arcadian, which we saw a photo of before, to go ashore. Orlo tells us that the process of packing up and leaving the Arcadian, who perhaps we shall never see again. GHQ camp is in a pleasant position on the low spit which curves around into Kefalo Point. Soil of the camp sandy, covered with stubbly grass, and here and there a few patches of corn. Officers' lines, 4 rows of tents, and men's lines run out at right angles. A few marquees for officers and 3 marquees as mess tents. The general has a little camp to himself by the one poor tree on the island, and we'll see some photographs of that soon. Here's Orlo, one of those few photos of him outside his tent on Imbros Island. And these are some of the characters and the journalists involved. Obviously, Ellis Ashmead Bartlett, who you will no doubt be aware of from his reporting at the time. Is for Australian and New Zealand audiences, he's the first to report on the landings of the Anzacs. He's not altogether too well liked by Orlo, and certainly not by those at General Headquarters. And then on the right there, you can see Compton Mackenzie, who, a novelist, he's actually sent out to Gallipoli because Orlo tells General Hamilton that he knows Compton Mackenzie when he sees Hamilton reading one of Compton Mackenzie's novels. And he says, "Oh, sir, I know him. He's trying to get a commission." And Hamilton says, "Well, tell him to get in touch with," and he gives him a name, "and I'll have him out on my staff." And that's how Compton Mackenzie finds his way to Gallipoli, and then later on to his MI6 work that he was doing in Greece. We start to get these other really damning impressions of people. So again, things are getting worse. There's not a lot of progress. On the 2nd of June 1915, Orlo wrote in his diary, "Really, Sir Ian," so he's talking about Hamilton here, "really, Sir Ian does not impress me. He can't say a thing direct, nor bring himself to stand up to Kitchener." 4 days later, on the 6th of June, he writes, "At night, sent another long telegram to Kitchener, saying that not only must we have reinforcements, but also reliefs, since the Turks since the Turkish have fresh troops and ours have been fighting since the 25th of April. Ours are at best are better than the Turks at best, but all continuously under shell fire and have no rest. Unless reliefs are sent, we shall be reduced to position of defenders in close siege, as men undoubtedly getting worn out. On the 13th of June, today long telegrams sent to War Office in answer to queries as to our positions, prospects, future plans, etc., with urgent demands for answer. Obviously, new cabinet considering this campaign very seriously. Also, that someone who has been here has been talking to them in a rather alarmist way, and he's talking about Ellis Ashmead Bartlett, the journalist there, which was indeed true. 2 days later, the 15th of June, there's more quarrels inside GHQ, and he writes, both Aspinall and the Chief of General Staff Braithwaite are fundamentally stupid, however good staff officers they may be. It is Dornay who really keep on thinking of things and working out schemes and appreciations in his head. The next day, the 17th, 2 days later, the 17th of June, good many wires all day. The sending of 3 new divisions leads to a lot of wiring. Appreciations and preparations for the big move at Anzac, when they do come, are progressing. And so we see here there's all of this traffic about sending new divisions, reinforcing Gallipoli, and this leads to the things we've just been talking about in the previous 2 discussions, where we see the campaign prioritise the Anzac sector and lead to the August offensive. Again, it gives us an insight into that plan. Who's doing the planning, whose ideas it is, how the staff understand the direction from a high, what they think of Hamilton's ideas, how they translate that into paperwork that then informs the corps and divisional generals about what they ought to do. I won't quote too much more than that, but 110 years ago today, on the 12th of July, the sun is very hot and the high breeze prevents our tent being opened properly as papers all blow about. One longs sometimes for proper shade. By Jove, how bored I do get with this life and this work, especially when I don't feel well. However, coming operations may liven things up next month. I find that my ideas about General Hamilton are quite correct, that he really never does anything at all, never has a scheme, has a shallow, at times obstinate mind, no grasp of detail. He doesn't for a moment realise how serious and extraordinary the situation is here. If this next attack fails, it means in all probability thorough and complete failure. And of course, we've heard in the previous 2 talks that it was thoroughly defeated and a thorough failure. And he takes us through that the information that's flowing back into general headquarters throughout the campaign. And again, writing down what he sees. Here you can see a picture of Hamilton leaving his tent. But in the aftermath of the August offensive, people were looking for scalps, and some of those start with Stopford, Lindley, Sitwell, and Marne. So divisional and brigade commanders and corps commander from Suvla Bay, and then we start to see discussions about whether it should be more. Dornay, it goes back to London and gives his frank views to everyone who will listen. And he and Orlo have this discussion about basically how frank Dornay might be. He says, basically Orlo's view is the reputations of these generals matter less than being honest about the challenges and failures of this campaign. Here, Dornay said that it was a big job. This is going back to London, to be honest. But he had to balance honest advice against his loyalty to his chief. A really strong man, he said, would perhaps go home and get them both Stellenboshed. He's talking about Hamilton and Braithwaite, his chief of staff. Although I said to him plainly, I thought at this time the nation's good was much more important than the reputation of Sir Ian. And on it goes and on it goes. Here we have a photograph, not Orlo's, but a photograph of headquarters. You can see this is not the sort of grand chateaus that you hear of. These are tents on the island. Seeing here, that's the part that's circled there is Hamilton's actual headquarters building and his sleeping tent. Here you see a bomb that was dropped by a Turkish aircraft, landed. One bomb landed 100 yards away from General's camp, failed to explode, photographed it after breakfast, and there's the photograph. And we also see, because Gallipoli is not the only thing on their radar, Salonika picks up. And so Orlo's diary takes a shift into a lot of the discussions between London and Gallipoli about sending troops, so French and British troops, to Salonika. And that takes up months from September on, late September on. Salonika appears most days in his diary, and he goes to Salonika with the headquarters. There's some wonderful material there about the discussions that are occurring. And then there's a bombshell telegram. So nearly everything that comes in, it's Orlo's job to write. But on the 15th of October, he says, wire from Kitchener saying that the following cipher is personal and very secret and only to be seen by Sir Ian. What this may pretend, heaven only knows. The next day, the 16th of October, he writes, the following wire in question turned up at midnight and was deciphered by General before breakfast. It was nothing less than a bombshell saying, at a council of war held last night, it was decided that although the government fully appreciate the gallant manner in which, etc., it was advisable to make a change in command. General Munro is being sent to relieve you and is bringing Chief of Staff, so Braithwaite should also return. Birdwood should replace you until Munro's arrival. So we have a sacking here, and Orlo's got a front seat to Hamilton being sacked and recalled to London. Here we have that photo. On Hamilton's last day, the 17th of October, the General shook me warmly by the hand and said, goodbye, Cipher. We have done a lot of good work together. To all of us, he said, goodbye to you all. Do as good work for my successor as you have for me. And with that, he left for home. Here we have a photograph of Munro, General Munro, and his Chief of Staff, Lyndon Bell. They're sent out to give an honest appreciation. They give that appreciation, which is that they should evacuate the peninsula. Secretary of State for War, Lord Kitchener, doesn't really like that advice, and he then soon sails out. And Orlo is privy to all these meetings. He's on the ships when Kitchener's there. He's writing it all down in his diary, and then he's ciphering the cables that Kitchener is sending back to London, and he's jotting it all down again in his diary. Kitchener himself comes out. You can see there the picture with Birdwood. So Kitchener on the left, Birdwood on the right, and he himself recommends evacuation. And then there's the other challenge of making that evacuation occur, doing all the paperwork and the orders that are required for it, and it falls on GHQ. And you can see some of those members here, including Orlo, second from right. They plan the evacuation in accordance with General Birdwood's headquarters. So Birdwood is made, commands the Dardanelles Army, and General Headquarters splits. So part of General Headquarters, including Orlo, stay with Munro, and part of the GHQ go to form Army Headquarters under Birdwood. And you can see here another of all those photos where those two generals are discussing the evacuation plans. On the evacuation itself, and I'm about to wrap up to give us some time for questions. On the 20th of December, 1915, he says, on that day, all our troops, both at Anzac and Souville, had got off without the Turks discovering it. This ends a really great feat of organisation, helped by wonderful weather. I would like to have heard the language of the Germans when they found out what a chance they had missed. It is, of course, a sad reflection how many lives were spent and gallant deeds performed fruitlessly at Souville and Anzac, but one cannot help being tremendously glad that they are abandoned. The force can now be rested and refitted and made ready to strike somewhere really useful. Then shortly after, on the 9th of January 1916, when Helles was evacuated, hurrah, great news from Helles. Evacuation completed 4 a.m. No French casualties, 1 British wounded, all howitzers evacuated and guns with the exception of 1 6-inch and 10 obsolescent 15-pounder guns and 6 heavy and practically worn out French guns. So ends more brightly the doleful chapter of the Gallipoli expedition. The whole force is now free to strike elsewhere, and the Germans should be correspondingly depressed. It is also pleasing that all this was done before Murray arrives, which he does at 1:30 today, so that old Munro goes home with complete success in his pocket. On the 10th of January, having started his diary on the 13th, 13th of March, he says, "Here I shall close this volume of my diary, which ends on a note of great hope for the future. Asquith has spoken warmly of our achievements in the House, saying that generals, etc., would be recommended for special recognition. Very warm wires from the King and Kitchener." And so that's Orlo, bottom right. And here he is after Gallipoli, serving again in the staff of GHQ for the Egyptian Expeditionary Force, where he again kept the war diary, and his pen is visible on nearly every day of that war diary through 16 and 17 and into early 1918. And finally, a closing quote, which we actually open our book with, and he wrote this later in reflecting on Gallipoli. "The history of the Gallipoli campaign, rich in military lessons, should also serve as a general warning to all those who at crises place undue confidence in cabinets." It shows his views about the role of politicians, which he worked with for his entire career, and their effect on the campaign.